My office was on the 15th floor of a glass building downtown, with a view of the mountains that surrounded Phoenix. I'd watch the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, and feel a peace that seemed impossible to find at Maple Ridge Drive. My role as senior account manager meant I was responsible for some of our biggest clients, companies that trusted me to manage their marketing campaigns and deliver results. I was good at my job, really good, and my supervisor had been hinting about a promotion to marketing director. The work required attention to detail, strategic thinking, and the ability to manage multiple projects simultaneously, skills I'd always possessed, but that seemed to be sharpening as my personal life grew more uncertain. One evening in early May, I came home to find Michael in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with his phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking in a low voice, almost a whisper, and when he saw me, he quickly ended the call. "Work stuff," he said, but his eyes didn't meet mine, and he slipped the phone into his pocket with the kind of guilty haste that made my pulse quicken. I nodded and started pulling ingredients from the refrigerator to make dinner, but my hands were shaking slightly as I chopped vegetables. The kitchen, which had always been my favorite room in the house, suddenly felt like a stage where we were both performing roles in a play neither of us had auditioned for. That night, after Michael had fallen asleep, I found myself standing at the window in our guest room, looking out at the pool that reflected the security lights from our neighbors' yards. The room was neat and orderly, the way I kept everything, in our house, but it felt charged with possibility, as if it was waiting for something to happen. I thought about the mortgage payments I made every month, automatically withdrawn from my checking account. I thought about the property taxes, the homeowner's insurance, the maintenance and repairs that came with owning a house in the desert. Michael contributed to household expenses, but the house itself, the actual ownership, had always been mine. It was a fact so basic, so fundamental, that I'd never really considered its implications. Standing in that guest room, watching the moonlight dance on the pool water, I felt something shifting inside me. Not yet the anger that would come later, but a growing awareness that the woman who'd bought this house with her grandmother's inheritance money was still there, somewhere beneath the confused and hurt wife I'd become. She was just waiting for the right moment to remind everyone, including myself, exactly who she was. The next morning, Michael left for work even earlier than usual, mumbling something about a job site inspection as he grabbed his travel coffee mug and headed for the garage. I watched from the kitchen window as his black pickup truck backed out of the driveway, and for the first time in months, I felt relieved to see him go. I called in sick to work that day, something I rarely did, and spent the morning in my home office going through financial records. I pulled out the folder where I kept all the house-related documents, the original purchase agreement, the mortgage papers, the homeowner's insurance policy, the property tax statements. Every single document had my name on it, and my name alone. Emma Rodriguez, homeowner. Emma Rodriguez, responsible party. Emma Rodriguez, the woman who'd turned a house into a home and was slowly watching her marriage crumble within its walls. As I sat there surrounded by paperwork, my laptop open to our joint checking account, I began to see patterns I'd been too trusting to notice before. The restaurant charges weren't random, they happened on specific days, always in the same part of town. The gas station purchases followed a route that made no sense if Michael was actually going to the job sites he claimed to be visiting. And those clothing store charges? They'd been happening for months. Small amounts that I'd assumed were gifts for me that never materialized. By lunchtime, I'd constructed a timeline that painted a picture I could no longer ignore. My husband was having an affair, and he'd been having it for at least 6 months, possibly longer. The woman lived or worked on the east side of Phoenix. They met regularly for dinner, and he was buying her clothes and gifts with money from our joint account. I closed the laptop and walked to the guest room, standing in the doorway and imagining what it would feel like to have that space invaded by another woman. The thought made my stomach clench, but underneath the nausea was something else. a cold, clear anger that felt surprisingly welcome after months of confusion and self-doubt. That evening, when Michael came home with another excuse about overtime, and another story that didn't quite add up, I smiled and nodded and asked about his day. But inside, I was no longer the worried wife wondering what she'd done wrong. I was a woman who owned a house, had a successful career, and was about to discover just how strong she could be when everything she'd built was threatened. I didn't know yet about Jessica. Didn't know she was 5 months pregnant. Didn't know that Michael's betrayal was about to become so brazen that it would force me to show him exactly who held the real power in this relationship. But sitting across from him at our dinner table that night, watching him lie with such practiced ease, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The scared, confused woman who'd been making excuses for her husband's behavior was disappearing, replaced by someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. Someone who remembered that this house, this life, this future belonged to her, and she wasn't about to let anyone take it away without a fight. The stage was set, though I didn't know it yet. In a few weeks, Michael would make a move so audacious, so disrespectful, that it would trigger a chain of events that would change all our lives forever. But that night, I was just a woman sitting in her own kitchen, finally beginning to understand that sometimes the most important battles are the ones you fight for yourself. The discovery came on a Tuesday morning in June, when Phoenix was already baking under a sun that promised another day of triple-digit heat. I'd woken up early, as I always did, to water the desert plants in our front yard before the temperature became unbearable. The sprinkler system could handle most of the watering, but I liked to check each plant individually, looking for signs of stress or disease that automated systems might miss. I was adjusting the drip irrigation around the barrel cacti when Michael's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter inside. He was upstairs in the shower, and the sound carried through the open sliding door to the patio. The phone buzzed again, then again, in the rapid succession that usually meant someone was either very excited or very upset about something. I shouldn't have looked. I know that now, and I knew it then. But something about the urgency of those notifications pulled me back into the kitchen. The phone lay face up on the granite countertop, and even from across the room I could see the preview of messages appearing on the lock screen. "Baby, I can't wait to see you today. The doctor said everything looks perfect. I've been thinking about names. What do you think about Alexander for a boy? I know this is complicated, but I love you so much. We're going to be a real family soon." The messages were from someone named Jessica Chen, and each word felt like a physical blow. I stood there, in my kitchen, dirt still under my fingernails from gardening, reading evidence of my husband's betrayal spelled out in casual text messages. But it wasn't just an affair. This woman was pregnant, talking about doctor visits and baby names, planning a future with my husband. I heard the shower shut off upstairs and quickly moved away from the phone, my heart pounding so hard I was sure Michael would hear it when he came downstairs. I busied myself making coffee, going through the motions of our morning routine, while my mind raced to process what I'd just learned. When Michael appeared in the kitchen 10 minutes later, hair still damp and smelling like the expensive shower gel I'd bought him for his birthday, he moved toward his phone with the casual confidence of a man who believed his secrets were safe. He glanced at the screen, and I watched his face carefully, noting the slight softening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible smile that touched his lips as he read Jessica's messages. "Good morning," I said, my voice sounding surprisingly normal considering that my entire world had just shifted on its axis. "Morning, babe," he replied, slipping the phone into his pocket without missing a beat. "I've got to head out early today. Big presentation for the Scottsdale project." I nodded and handed him his travel mug, filled with the dark roast coffee he preferred. "What time will you be home?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Probably late. You know how these client meetings go." He kissed my cheek. the same perfunctory gesture he'd been giving me for months, and headed for the garage. After his truck disappeared down Maple Ridge Drive, I sat at our kitchen table and stared at the place where his phone had been. Jessica Chen. The name echoed in my head as I tried to piece together how long this had been going on and how I'd missed the signs of not just an affair, but a pregnancy. I called Lisa during my lunch break that day, asking if she could meet me at the Starbucks near our office building. She took one look at my face when I walked in and immediately ordered 2 large coffees and guided me to a table in the back corner, away from the crowd of downtown professionals grabbing their afternoon caffeine fix. "What happened?" she asked, her brown eyes filled with concern. I told her everything. The months of suspicious behavior, the text messages I'd seen that morning, the growing certainty that Michael was not just cheating but planning a future with someone else. Lisa listened without interrupting, occasionally reaching across the table to squeeze my hand when my voice started to shake. "Emma," she said when I finished, "you need to protect yourself. Financially, legally, emotionally. This isn't just about an affair anymore. If this woman is pregnant and they're talking about being a family, Michael is going to make some moves that could affect everything you've built." I knew she was right, but knowing and accepting were 2 different things. The drive home that evening felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold from a distance. I kept thinking about the guest room upstairs, wondering if Michael had any plans for that space that he hadn't shared with me. Over the next few weeks, I became a detective in my own marriage. I started paying attention to patterns in Michael's behavior with the focused intensity I usually reserved for work projects. He left the house every Tuesday and Thursday evening, claiming he was meeting Robert to discuss business expansion. But Robert had mentioned during a recent barbecue that he was coaching his son's Little League team on Tuesday and Thursday nights. I noticed that Michael had started doing his own laundry, something he'd never shown interest in before. When I offered to wash his work clothes, he'd decline, saying he didn't want to burden me with his dusty construction gear. But when I checked the hamper in our master bathroom, his clothes didn't smell like sawdust and concrete. They smelled like women's perfume. The credit card statements became a roadmap of deception. Charges at baby stores in Tempe. Purchases at maternity clothing shops. A significant charge at a jewelry store that made my hands shake when I saw it. Michael was building a life with Jessica Chen, using money from accounts that had my name on them, while lying to my face every single day. I started working even later at the office, partly to avoid the tension at home, and partly because focusing on client campaigns was the only thing that kept my mind from spiraling into panic. My supervisor, Janet, noticed my increased dedication and called me into her office one afternoon in early July. "Emma, your work has been exceptional lately, but I'm concerned about you," she said, closing her office door behind us. "You look exhausted, and you're here until almost 9 o'clock most nights. Is everything okay at home?" I considered telling her the truth, but the words stuck in my throat. Admitting that my marriage was falling apart felt like admitting failure, even though I knew intellectually that Michael's choices were not my fault. "Just trying to stay ahead of the summer campaigns," I said instead. "You know how crazy it gets with the back-to-school retail pushes." Janet nodded, but her expression remained worried. "Take care of yourself, Emma. Whatever's going on, remember that you're one of the strongest people I know. And if you need time off or someone to talk to, my door is always open." That evening, I came home to find Michael in our bedroom, packing a small overnight bag. My pulse quickened as I watched him fold 2 days' worth of clothes with unusual care. "Going somewhere?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Robert's cabin up in Sedona," he said without looking up from his packing. "We're going to spend the weekend looking at some potential investment properties in the area. Maybe expand the business beyond Phoenix." I knew he was lying. Robert had mentioned just last week that he'd sold his cabin in Sedona 2 years ago because his ex-wife got it in their divorce settlement. but I nodded and smiled, playing the role of the supportive wife, while mentally noting this as another piece of evidence in the case I was building against my own husband. "Sounds like a great opportunity," I said. "Drive safely." Michael left. Friday evening with promises to call me when he arrived safely. The call never came, but I hadn't expected it to. Instead, I spent the weekend doing something I should have done months earlier. I hired a private investigator. David Martinez came highly recommended by Janet, who'd used his services during her own divorce 3 years earlier. He was in his 50s, with graying hair and the kind of calm, professional demeanor that suggested he'd seen every variety of human deception and wasn't surprised by any of it anymore. We met on Monday morning at a coffee shop in Central Phoenix, and I handed him a folder containing everything I'd compiled over the past month. The credit card statements, the timeline of Michael's suspicious behavior, Jessica Chen's name and phone number, and photographs of Michael that David could use for surveillance. "How long do you want me to follow him?" David asked, flipping through the documents with practiced efficiency. "Until I have enough evidence to know exactly what I'm dealing with," I said. "I need to understand the scope of this relationship and whether he's planning to leave me for this woman." David nodded and quoted me a daily rate that made me wince, but I agreed without hesitation. The money would come from my personal savings account, the one Michael didn't have access to, where I'd been automatically depositing a portion of my salary for the past 5 years. The waiting was the hardest part. For the next 2 weeks, I went through the motions of normal married life while David conducted surveillance and gathered evidence. Michael continued his pattern of late nights and weekend disappearances, each lie becoming more elaborate and confident. On a Wednesday evening in late July, David called me at work. I never imagined I'd be standing in my own kitchen, watching my husband carry another woman's suitcases into what used to be our guest room. The woman was 5 months pregnant, glowing with that maternal radiance that should have been mine, and she was moving into my house like she belonged there. What Michael didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that the deed to this house had my name on it, and my name alone. And I was about to teach them both a lesson they'd never forget. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Emma Rodriguez, and until 3 months ago, I thought I had the perfect marriage. I'm 32 years old, a senior account manager at Pinnacle Marketing in downtown Phoenix, and I've always prided myself on being the kind of woman who has her life together. You know, the type organized planner, always 3 steps ahead, the person everyone comes to when they need something done right. I drive a silver Honda Accord that I keep spotless, I meal prep every Sunday, and I've never missed a mortgage payment in my life. Michael and I met 4 years ago at a networking event in Scottsdale. He was charming in that effortless way that some men just have, with dark hair that was always perfectly styled, and a smile that could convince you to invest in whatever construction project he was pitching. He owned his own contracting company, built custom homes for wealthy clients in the Phoenix area, and when he talked about his work, his eyes lit up like he was describing the 8th wonder of the world. I fell for that passion, that drive, the way he made me feel like I was the most important person in the room when he looked at me. We got married 2 years ago in a small ceremony at the Desert Botanical Garden. Nothing too extravagant, just close family and friends, exactly the way I'd always pictured it. Michael moved into my house on Maple Ridge Drive, the 4-bedroom home I'd purchased 3 years earlier with the inheritance money from my grandmother. It was my first major adult decision, buying that house, and I remember feeling so proud when I signed those papers. The realtor had smiled and said I was smart to invest in real estate so young, and I'd felt like I was finally becoming the woman I'd always wanted to be. The house sits in one of Phoenix's nicest suburban neighborhoods, where the streets are wide and lined with palm trees, and every yard is perfectly manicured despite the desert heat. Our home has a red tile roof, stucco walls painted in a warm, beige that looks golden in the Arizona sunset, and a front yard filled with drought-resistant plants that I'd carefully selected and maintained. The backyard has a pool that we'd used constantly during our first summer together, hosting barbecues and pool parties where Michael would grill burgers and I'd make my famous southwestern potato salad. Inside, the house has an open floor plan that flows from the kitchen to the living room, with large windows that let in plenty of natural light. The master bedroom upstairs has a walk-in closet that Michael and I shared, though he never seemed to appreciate the organization system I'd implemented. Down the hall from our bedroom were 2 additional rooms, one that I used as a home office for when I needed to work late, and another that we'd always called the guest room. It had a queen-sized bed with a blue and white comforter set, a small dresser, and a window that looked out over the backyard pool. For the first year and a half of our marriage, everything seemed perfect. Michael's business was doing well, my career was advancing steadily, and we talked about starting a family. We'd lie in bed on Sunday mornings, him tracing patterns on my shoulder while I planned out our week, and he'd say things like, "When we have kids, they're going to love growing up in this house." I'd picture little feet running down the hallways, toys scattered in the living room, maybe converting that guest room into a nursery painted in soft yellow or mint green. But somewhere around our 18-month anniversary, things started to shift. Michael began working later hours, claiming that several big projects required his constant attention. He'd come home after I was already in bed, smelling like sawdust and something else I couldn't quite identify. When I'd ask about his day, he'd give me vague answers about permits and subcontractors, then change the subject to what was for dinner or whether I'd paid the water bill. I started noticing small changes in his behavior. He'd guard his phone more carefully, taking it with him to the bathroom or keeping it face down on the nightstand. When it would buzz with text messages during dinner, he'd glance at it with an expression I'd never seen before, something between guilt and excitement. He started going out for drinks with his business partner Robert more frequently, sometimes not coming home until well past midnight. When I'd express concern, he'd accuse me of being clingy or controlling, words that stung because I'd always been independent. The first real red flag came on a Thursday evening in March. I'd gotten home from work early and decided to surprise Michael by making his favorite dinner, carne asada with homemade salsa and rice. I'd set the table with our wedding china and lit candles, thinking maybe a romantic evening would help us reconnect. But when he walked through the door at almost 9 o'clock, he barely looked at the spread I'd prepared. "I already ate," he said, loosening his tie and heading straight for the stairs. Robert and I grabbed something after the job site meeting. I stood there in our kitchen, surrounded by food that was growing cold, feeling like a fool. The candles I'd lit seemed suddenly ridiculous, and I found myself blowing them out one by one, each small flame disappearing like another piece of the marriage I thought I understood. That night, I lay awake listening to Michael's steady breathing beside me, wondering when I'd become the kind of wife who had to make appointments with her own husband. I thought about my grandmother, the woman who'd left me the money for this house. She'd been married to my grandfather for 53 years before he passed, and I'd asked her once what the secret was to a long marriage. She'd smiled and said, "Mija, respect goes both ways. The moment someone stops seeing your worth, that's when you know it's time to remember who you are without them." The weeks that followed blurred together in a pattern of Michael's increasing absence and my growing suspicion. I found myself paying attention to details I'd previously ignored, the way he'd shower immediately after coming home, how he'd started dressing better for work, the new cologne that appeared on his dresser. I noticed charges on our shared credit card for restaurants I'd never been to, gas stations on the other side of town, and once, a purchase at a women's clothing store that made my stomach drop. I considered confronting him multiple times, rehearsing conversations in my head while I drove to work or stood in the shower. But each time I'd work up the courage, he'd do something thoughtful like bring me coffee in bed or mention a vacation we should take, and I'd convince myself I was being paranoid. Maybe this was just a rough patch. Maybe all marriages went through periods like this. My best friend Lisa, who worked in the same marketing firm as me, started noticing my distraction during our lunch breaks. We'd sit in the company break room, picking at salads while she talked about her latest dating disasters, and she'd stop mid-sentence to study my face. "You look tired," she'd say, her brow furrowed with concern. "Is everything okay at home?" I'd always deflect, making excuses about work stress or not sleeping well because of the heat. But Lisa had known me since college, and she could read me better than anyone. She'd nod and change the subject, but I could see the worry in her eyes. The way she'd watch me when she thought I wasn't looking. The truth was, I was exhausted. Not just physically, though the sleepless nights were taking their toll, but emotionally drained from constantly second-guessing myself. I'd catch my reflection in bathroom mirrors at work and see a woman who looked older than her 32 years, with worry lines around her eyes and a tension in her shoulders that never seemed to fade. At home, I threw myself into maintaining the house with an almost obsessive intensity. I'd scrub the kitchen counters until they gleamed, organize closets that were already perfectly arranged, and tend to the garden with a focus that bordered on manic. The physical activity helped quiet my racing thoughts, and there was something satisfying about having control over at least one aspect of my environment. Our bedroom became a place of polite distance. We'd lie on opposite sides of our king-sized bed, the space between us feeling like an ocean. Michael would scroll through his phone or watch television, while I'd read or work on my laptop, both of us existing in the same space, but living completely separate lives. The easy intimacy we'd once shared had evaporated, replaced by careful politeness and the kind of surface-level conversations you might have with a roommate. I started staying later at work, partly because I genuinely enjoyed my job, and partly because home no longer felt like the sanctuary it once had. "Rodriguez, I think you need to see what I've found," he said. "Can you meet me tomorrow morning?" We met at the same coffee shop, and David handed me a manila envelope thick with photographs and documents. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing images that confirmed my worst fears and then exceeded them. There was Michael, holding hands with a woman I recognized from her Facebook profile as Jessica Chen. She was visibly pregnant, probably 6 or 7 months along, with the kind of radiant glow that pregnancy magazines always featured on their covers. They were walking into a restaurant, laughing at something one of them had said, looking for all the world like a happy couple expecting their first child. But the photographs that truly devastated me were the ones taken outside a small apartment complex in Tempe. Michael had a key to Jessica's apartment. He was loading boxes into his truck, carrying what looked like baby furniture and supplies. In one particularly damning image, he was kissing Jessica goodbye on her doorstep, his hand resting protectively on her pregnant belly. "There's more," David said gently, pointing to a document in the envelope. "I did some research on Ms. Chen. She's been telling people that she's engaged to Michael. According to her social media posts, they're planning to move in together as soon as he finalizes his divorce." I stared at him, the words not quite computing. His divorce? We haven't even talked about divorce. According to her posts, Michael told her that you two have been separated for months and that the divorce is just a formality. She's planning a baby shower for next month, and several of the comments suggest that people believe Michael is single. The coffee in my cup had gone cold, but I barely noticed. I was reading Jessica's Facebook posts, printed out and organized chronologically, watching my husband's deception unfold in real time. She'd been posting about her pregnancy journey, sharing ultrasound pictures and nursery decorations, tagging Michael in posts about their future together. "There's one more thing," David said, his voice careful. "Michael has been looking at apartments, larger places, suitable for a family. It appears he's planning to move out of your house soon." I closed the envelope and sat back in my chair, feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. The scope of Michael's betrayal was staggering. He wasn't just having an affair, He was systematically dismantling our marriage while building a new life with Jessica. And he was doing it all while living in my house, using my utilities, eating food I'd purchased, sleeping in a bed I'd chosen. "What do you recommend I do?" I asked David. "Get a lawyer," he said immediately. "And do it today. If Michael is planning to move out, you need to be prepared for whatever legal and financial moves he might make. Protect your assets, protect your house, and protect yourself." I spent my lunch break that day calling divorce attorneys, something I'd never imagined I'd need to do. The third lawyer I called, Patricia Williams, could see me that afternoon. Her office was in a downtown high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the Phoenix Mountains. Patricia was in her 40s, with short blonde hair and the kind of sharp intelligence that made me feel immediately more confident about my situation. She reviewed David's evidence with the same calm professionalism he'd shown, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. "Emma, you're in a stronger position than you might realize," she said when she finished, reviewing the documents. "The house is solely in your name, purchased before your marriage with your own funds. In Arizona, that makes it your separate property, not marital property. Michael has no legal claim to it." I felt a wave of relief so intense that I almost started crying. "So he can't take the house?" "Not only can he not take it, but you have every legal right to ask him to leave. You're not obligated to provide housing for your cheating husband while he plans his future with another woman." Patricia explained my options with clarity and compassion. I could file for divorce immediately, or I could wait to see what Michael's next move would be. I could ask him to leave the house, or I could be the one to move out temporarily. I could freeze our joint accounts, or I could continue monitoring them to gather more evidence of his financial deception. "What would you do?" I asked her. She smiled, the expression of a woman who'd helped many clients navigate similar situations. "I'd wait and see what he does next. Men like Michael often get overconfident when they think they're controlling the narrative. Give him enough rope and he'll hang himself." That evening, I sat in my home office, looking out at the pool where Michael and I had spent so many happy hours during the early days of our marriage. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the desert sunset in shades of orange and pink. That should have been beautiful, but just made me feel hollow inside. I thought about Jessica Chen, 6 months pregnant and planning a baby shower, believing that Michael was going to divorce me and marry her. I thought about Michael, spinning lies to both of us, living a double life with a skill that was both impressive and terrifying. And I thought about myself, the woman who'd bought this house with her grandmother's money, who'd built a successful career, who'd trusted her husband completely and was now discovering that trust had been weaponized against her. My phone buzzed, with a text from Michael. "Working late again. Don't wait up." For the first time in months, I laughed. A bitter, exhausted sound, but genuine laughter nonetheless. Because I knew something Michael didn't know. I knew about Jessica, about the pregnancy, about his plans to leave me, and most importantly, I knew that this house, this sanctuary he was taking for granted, belonged entirely to me. I texted him back, "Okay, drive safe." But what I was really thinking was, "Make your move, Michael, let's see how this plays out." The summer heat seemed to intensify over the next few weeks, as if the desert itself was building toward some kind of climax. I maintained my routine going to work, managing client accounts, keeping the house immaculate while I waited for Michael to reveal his hand. David continued his surveillance, sending me weekly reports that painted an increasingly clear picture of my husband's double life. Michael was spending 4 nights a week at Jessica's apartment. He'd bought her a car, a new Honda CR-V perfect, for a young mother, using money from our joint savings account. He'd registered for baby gifts at Target and Buy Buy Baby, listing himself as the father-to-be. He was living a completely parallel life, and the only thing preventing him from making, It official was the conversation he hadn't yet had with me. I began to understand that I held more power in this situation than I'd initially realized. Michael needed me to be the villain in his story. He needed me to be unreasonable, to refuse his request for divorce, to make demands that would justify his deception to Jessica and to himself. He was waiting for me to discover the affair so that he could paint himself as the victim of a bitter wife who wouldn't let him be happy. But I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Instead, I began preparing for war. I opened a new checking account at a different bank and began transferring money from our joint accounts, carefully documenting each transaction. I made copies of all our financial records and stored them in a safety deposit box that Michael didn't know about. I researched Arizona divorce law and learned everything I could about property division, spousal support, and adultery. Most importantly, I began to remember who I was before I became Michael's wife. I was Emma Rodriguez, a woman who'd graduated summa cum laude from Arizona State University with a degree in marketing. I was the senior account manager who'd increased client retention by 30% over the past 2 years. I was the granddaughter of Maria Rodriguez, a woman who'd immigrated from Mexico with nothing and built a successful restaurant that supported 3 generations of our family. I was not a victim. I was a woman who owned a house, had a career, and was about to remind my cheating husband that there were consequences for betrayal. The confrontation I'd been expecting came on a Thursday evening in mid-August, when the temperature was still hovering near 100 degrees at sunset. Michael came home earlier than usual, his expression serious in a way that immediately put me on alert. "Emma, we need to talk," he said, setting his keys on the kitchen counter with deliberate care. I was making dinner, grilling chicken and vegetables on our outdoor barbecue, but I turned off the burner and followed him into the living room. He sat on the couch we'd chosen together 2 years ago, and I took the chair across from him, maintaining distance that felt both protective and strategic. "I haven't been happy for a while," he began, using the tone of voice he employed when explaining construction delays to impatient clients. "I think we've grown apart, and I'm not sure we want the same things anymore." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral even though my heart was racing. "What kinds of things?" "Family things, future things. You've always been so focused on your career, and I want something more traditional, someone who wants to be a mother and a wife, not just a professional woman." The irony was staggering. Michael was criticizing me for the exact qualities that had attracted him to me in the first place, while his pregnant girlfriend waited at home for him to finalize the divorce he was requesting. "Are you asking for a divorce?" I said, cutting through his carefully rehearsed speech. He looked relieved that I'd said the word first. "I think it would be best for both of us. We can keep this amicable, split everything fairly. You keep your job and your independence, and I'll find something that works better for me." I studied his face, noting the confidence in his expression, the assumption that I would agree to his terms without question. He had no idea that I knew about Jessica, about the pregnancy, about the apartment he'd been furnishing, and the car he'd bought with our money. "What did you have in mind for splitting things?" I asked. "Well, we could sell the house and divide the proceeds. I know you put down the down payment, but I've been contributing to the mortgage for 2 years. It seems fair to split it 50-50. There it was. The real reason for this conversation. Michael didn't just want a divorce. He wanted to walk away with half the value of my house, money he planned to use to start his new life with Jessica and their baby. I smiled, an expression I knew looked warm and agreeable, even though inside I was calculating exactly how to destroy every assumption he'd just made. "That sounds reasonable," I said. "But I think we should take some time to figure out the details. Maybe you could stay in the guest room for a while, just until we sort everything out?" Michael's relief was palpable. "That would be great, Em. I really appreciate you being so understanding about this." Understanding, as if I were being gracious by agreeing to house my cheating husband while he planned to steal half my house. "Of course," I said. "We're both Adults. We can handle this maturely. What I didn't tell him was that I'd already spoken to Patricia Williams about his likely next moves. What I didn't mention was that David Martinez was documenting every detail of his relationship with Jessica Chen. And what I definitely didn't reveal was that I knew exactly what Michael was planning to do next. Because according to David's latest report, Jessica Chen was planning to move in with Michael very soon. She'd given notice on her apartment lease and was packing her belongings, expecting to move into what she believed would be their shared home. My home. The home that Michael had no legal claim to, but that he was apparently planning to share with his pregnant girlfriend while he sorted out his divorce from the wife who actually owned it. I went to bed that night with a sense of anticipation I hadn't felt in months. Michael had finally made his move, revealing his true intentions and his complete underestimation of the woman he'd married. Now it was my turn. And I was going to teach both Michael and Jessica Chen a lesson about assumptions, ownership, and the consequences of betraying a woman who held all the cards. The morning everything changed started like any other Saturday in August, with temperatures already climbing toward another scorching Phoenix day. I was in my home office, reviewing quarterly reports for our biggest client, when I heard the sound of Michael's truck pulling into the driveway. Nothing unusual about that, except that he told me he was going to be at a job site all morning, supervising the installation of custom cabinets in a Scottsdale mansion. I glanced out the window and saw him getting out of the driver's seat. But instead of heading toward the house alone, he walked around to the passenger side and opened the door. A woman stepped out, and even from the second floor, I could see the distinctive silhouette of someone in her third trimester of pregnancy. She had long black hair pulled back in a ponytail, wore a flowing summer dress that accentuated her belly, and moved with the careful grace of someone carrying precious cargo. Jessica Chen was here, at my house, stepping onto the driveway I paid to maintain with money from the job I'd never missed a day of in 5 years. I watched from behind the sheer curtains as Michael retrieved 2 large suitcases from the truck bed, setting them on the concrete with the kind of reverent care usually reserved for priceless artifacts. Jessica said something that made him laugh, and he leaned down to kiss her forehead, his hand automatically moving to rest on her pregnant belly in a gesture that was both intimate and possessive. My first instinct was to run downstairs and confront them immediately, to demand explanations and assert my ownership of the space they were so casually invading. But something Patricia Williams had said during our last meeting echoed in my mind. Let them reveal the full scope of their intentions before you show your hand. The more egregious their behavior, the stronger your position becomes. So I stayed hidden behind my office curtains and watched my husband help his pregnant girlfriend carry her belongings toward the front door of the house I owned. I watched him unlock the door with the key I'd had made for him 2 years ago, when I thought we were building a life together instead of him building an elaborate deception. They disappeared inside, and I could hear their voices drifting up from the foyer, though I couldn't make out specific words. I heard footsteps on the stairs, then moving down the hallway toward the guest room. The guest room with the queen-sized bed and the view of the pool. The room where Michael apparently planned to house his pregnant girlfriend while he sorted out his divorce. I sat at my desk, staring at quarterly projections that suddenly seemed trivial, and tried to process the magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't just adultery anymore. This was a hostile takeover of my home, a casual assumption that my property was available for their convenience, a level of disrespect so profound that it almost took my breath away. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Hey babe, brought a friend over to hang out by the pool. Hope that's okay. We'll try to keep it down." A friend. He was calling his pregnant girlfriend a friend, as if I were supposed to play hostess to the woman carrying his child while he worked up the courage to finalize our divorce. I typed back, "No problem. I'm working in my office. Have fun." What I wanted to type was, "Get that woman out of my house before I call the police." But I forced myself to stick to Patricia's strategy. Document everything. Let them dig their own grave. Respond with devastating precision when the time was right. I heard them moving around downstairs, opening and closing doors, their voices occasionally rising in laughter or conversation. At one point, I heard the sliding door to the patio open, followed by the sound of them settling into the outdoor furniture I'd carefully selected and arranged around the pool area. I moved to the window that overlooked the backyard and saw them, lying on the chaise lounges I'd bought last spring. Jessica was wearing a bikini that showcased her pregnancy, her hand resting protectively on her belly while she talked animatedly to Michael. He was listening with the kind of focused attention I hadn't seen from him in months, occasionally reaching over to touch her arm or her stomach. They looked like a couple on vacation, relaxing in their own backyard, planning their future while floating in a pool that reflected the Arizona sun. Except it wasn't their backyard, and it wasn't their pool, and the house that sheltered them from the desert heat belonged entirely to the woman watching them from an upstairs window. I took pictures, lots of pictures. Jessica lounging on my furniture, Michael grilling burgers on the barbecue I'd bought him for his birthday, both of them acting like they owned the place. Each photograph was evidence of their stunning entitlement, documentation that would prove invaluable when Patricia and I presented our case. Around noon, I heard the doorbell ring, followed by female voices greeting Jessica with excitement and warmth. I crept to the front window and saw 3 women standing in my foyer, each carrying gift bags and flowers. They were young, probably Jessica's age, dressed in sundresses and sandals appropriate for a casual pool party. A pool party. In my backyard, for my husband's pregnant girlfriend, while I worked upstairs in my own house. The audacity was so breathtaking that I almost laughed. Almost. I listened to them move through my house, commenting on the decor and layout with the casual familiarity of invited guests. I heard someone say, "Michael has such great taste in houses," and another voice respond, "Jessica is so lucky to have found someone who's ready to be a real father." Ready to be a real father. As if Michael's willingness to take responsibility for his child was some kind of noble sacrifice, rather than the bare minimum expected from a man who'd created a baby with his mistress. They spent the afternoon by the pool, and I spent it documenting everything from my office window. I photographed Jessica's friends, took note of their license plates, recorded snippets of conversation that drifted up to my window. I watched Michael play the role of attentive boyfriend and expectant father, bringing Jessica drinks and adjusting her umbrella to keep her shaded. At one point, I heard Jessica's voice clearly as she called to one of her friends. "Michael says, we might start looking for a bigger place soon, maybe something with a better school district for when the baby's older." A bigger place. Funded, no doubt, with the money Michael expected to get from selling my house. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself moving beyond anger into something colder and more dangerous. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. This was about 2 people who believed they could use my property, my hospitality, and my financial resources to build their new life together. They were so confident in their entitlement that they'd invited friends over to celebrate, turning my home into the backdrop for their happiness. I called David Martinez and asked him to come by within the hour. When he arrived, I met him at the front door and quietly led him upstairs to my office, where he could observe the pool party through my window. "Jesus," he said softly, taking pictures with a long-lens camera. "They're not even trying to hide it." "I need you to document everything," I told him. "Every person who's here, every interaction, every moment of them treating my house like it belongs to them." David nodded, his expression grim. "Emma, this level of disrespect is actually helpful for your case. No judge is going to look kindly on a man who brings his pregnant mistress to live in his wife's house." By evening, Jessica's friends had left, but Jessica herself showed no signs of departing. I watched Michael help her move more belongings from his truck into the guest room, including what appeared to be a small changing table and a bassinet that was clearly meant for a newborn. She wasn't just visiting, she was moving in. I waited until almost 10 o'clock before I made my move. Michael and Jessica were in the living room, watching a movie on the television I'd purchased, curled up together on the couch where I'd spent countless evenings reading or working on my laptop. They looked comfortable, settled, like a couple who belonged there. I walked downstairs slowly, deliberately, giving myself time to arrange my expression into something calm and pleasant. When I appeared in the living room doorway, they both looked up with the slightly guilty expressions of people who'd been caught doing something they weren't entirely sure they should be doing. "Hi there," I said, directing my smile toward Jessica. "I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Emma, Michael's wife." Jessica's face went pale, but she recovered quickly, rising from the couch with the awkward grace of someone in her third trimester. "Oh, hi. I'm Jessica. Michael told me you were okay with me staying here for a few days while I transition between apartments." Transition between apartments. What a delicate way to describe moving in with a married man. "Of course," I said, maintaining my pleasant tone. "Any friend of Michael's is welcome here. How far along are you?" 7 months, Jessica said, her hand moving instinctively to her belly. "It's been such a journey, you know. But Michael has been so supportive through everything." I nodded sympathetically. "That's wonderful. And where will you be staying? Michael mentioned the guest room?" "Yes, just temporarily," Michael interjected, his voice tight with tension. "Until Jessica finds a permanent place." "Perfect," I said. "The guest room has its own bathroom, so you'll have plenty of privacy. And please, make yourself at home. Use the kitchen whenever you need to. Help yourself to anything in the refrigerator. I want you to be comfortable here." Jessica relaxed visibly, her smile becoming more genuine. "Thank you so much, Emma. You're being incredibly gracious about this whole situation." Gracious. As if I were doing them a favor by allowing them to use my house as their love nest. "Well, I believe in treating people the way I'd want to be treated," I said. "Michael, could I speak with you in the kitchen for just a moment?" We left Jessica in the living room and walked to the kitchen, where I kept my voice low and my tone conversational. "How long is she planning to stay?" I asked. Michael had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Just a few weeks, maybe a month, until she gets settled somewhere else." "And the baby? When is she due?" "October," he said. "Look, Emma, I know this is weird, but Jessica doesn't have anywhere else to go right now. Her lease is up, and she's between jobs because of the pregnancy. I'm just trying to help a friend." A friend. He was still maintaining that fiction, even to me. "Of course," I said. "I understand wanting to help someone in need. We'll make it work." Michael's relief was obvious. "Thank you. I really appreciate you being so understanding about this." I smiled and touched his arm gently. "We're still married, Michael. Your friends are my friends." What I didn't tell him was that I'd already called Patricia Williams and left a voicemail describing the situation. What I didn't mention was that David Martinez had photographed the entire afternoon and was preparing a detailed report about Jessica's apparent move-in. And what I definitely didn't reveal was that I'd spent the afternoon researching Arizona tenant laws and learning exactly what rights Jessica Chen had as an unofficial resident of my property, which was to say, none at all. Over the next few days, I watched Jessica settle into my house with the confidence of someone who believed she belonged there. She rearranged the guest room furniture to accommodate the baby supplies Michael had brought over. She used my washer and dryer for her maternity clothes. She helped herself to food from my refrigerator and left her toiletries in the guest bathroom. Most tellingly, she started receiving mail at my address. I intercepted a package from Amazon containing baby clothes and a delivery from Bye Bye Baby with a breast pump and nursing supplies. Jessica Chen was establishing residency in my house, creating a paper trail that suggested she lived there legally. I documented everything. Every package, every piece of mail, every moment of her increasing comfort in my space. I photographed the baby furniture in the guest room, the maternity clothes hanging in the closet, the prenatal vitamins on the bathroom counter. Meanwhile, Michael continued to play the role of supportive boyfriend while maintaining the fiction that Jessica was just a temporary house guest. He'd cook dinner for the three of us, and we'd sit around my kitchen table making polite conversation about Jessica's pregnancy, her plans for the baby, and Michael's excitement about becoming a father. The surreal quality of these dinners was almost overwhelming. Here was my husband, discussing baby names and nursery themes with his pregnant girlfriend, while I sat in my own kitchen nodding and smiling like this was a perfectly normal arrangement. Jessica seemed genuinely confused by my acceptance of the situation. During one of our kitchen conversations, while Michael was upstairs showering, she said, "Emma, I have to ask you something, and please don't take this the wrong way, but aren't you upset about any of this?" I looked at her carefully, noting the genuine concern in her eyes. She was younger than me, probably in her mid-20s, with the kind of natural beauty that didn't require much maintenance. Her pregnancy had given her skin a luminous quality that made her look even younger, more vulnerable. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Well, Michael told me that you two have been separated for months, that you're just roommates now while you work out the divorce details. But you seem so friendly about everything. Most women wouldn't be okay with their husband's girlfriend staying in their house." There it was, the lie Michael had told her to justify this arrangement. According to his version of events, we were already separated, already planning our divorce, already living as roommates rather than spouses. Jessica believed she was moving in with her boyfriend, not invading another woman's marriage. "Michael? And I have a very mature relationship," I said carefully. "We want what's best for everyone involved." Jessica nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "It's just that he talks about you sometimes, and it doesn't sound like someone who's separated from his wife. He talks about you like he's still married to you." Smart girl. She was picking up on the inconsistencies in Michael's story, sensing that something didn't quite add up about our supposed separation. "Relationships are complicated," I said. "People process change differently." That evening, I called Patricia Williams and scheduled an emergency meeting for the next morning. I'd gathered enough evidence, witnessed enough entitlement, and endured enough disrespect. It was time to remind everyone involved exactly who owned the house they were treating like their personal love nest. Patricia listened to my account of the past week with the focused attention of a lawyer calculating damages. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and smiled with the satisfaction of someone who'd just been handed a winning case. "Emma, they've given us everything we need," she said. "Michael has moved his pregnant mistress into your house without your consent, using your utilities and amenities while planning to leave you for her. Jessica has established residency in your property under false pretenses, believing she has rights she doesn't actually possess." "What's our next move?" I asked. "We're going to file for divorce immediately, with a motion for exclusive use of the marital residence. Given the circumstances, no judge will allow Michael to remain in your house with his pregnant girlfriend. We're also going to seek compensation for the financial damages he's caused by depleting your joint accounts to support his affair." I felt a surge of anticipation that was almost electric. "How long will this take?" "I can have the papers filed by tomorrow afternoon. Service of process will happen within 48 hours. And Emma?" Patricia's smile was razor sharp. "When Michael and Jessica find out that you're not the understanding wife they thought you were, their whole world is going to come crashing down." I left Patricia's office feeling lighter than I had in months. The passive phase of this ordeal was ending, and the active phase was about to begin. Michael and Jessica had made the fatal error of underestimating the woman whose house they were occupying, whose generosity they were exploiting, and whose marriage they were destroying. They thought they held all the cards because Michael had convinced Jessica that I was a willing participant in their arrangement, and Jessica's presence gave Michael leverage in what he assumed would be divorce negotiations. But they were about to learn that the woman who owned the house, earned the money, and held the moral high ground had been playing a completely different game all along. That night, I cooked dinner for all three of us one last time. Grilled salmon, with lemon and herbs, roasted vegetables, and a nice bottle of wine for Michael and me. Jessica drank sparkling water with lime, her hands resting on her belly as she talked about her latest doctor's appointment and the baby's healthy development. "The nursery is going to be so beautiful," she said, describing the color scheme she'd chosen and the furniture she was planning to buy. "Michael has such great ideas about creating a calm, peaceful environment for the baby." I nodded and smiled, refilling her water glass and asking follow-up questions about her plans. I was the picture of supportive hospitality, even as I counted down the hours until my lawyer's papers would be served and their peaceful little fantasy would explode into 1,000 pieces. After dinner, I excused myself to my office, claiming I had work to catch up on. What I actually did was sit at my desk and stare out at the pool area where Jessica and Michael were relaxing in the warm evening air, talking quietly about their future together. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, they would discover that their assumption of my compliance was catastrophically wrong. Tomorrow, the woman they'd underestimated would remind them that ownership comes with power, and power wielded correctly can reshape any situation. I went to bed that night with a sense of calm I hadn't felt since this whole ordeal began. In less than 24 hours, Michael and Jessica Chen would learn what it meant to truly understand who held the cards in this game they thought they were winning. And I was going to enjoy every moment of their education. The process server arrived at 9:30 on a Tuesday morning, exactly as Patricia Williams had promised. I was in my home office, pretending to work while actually watching the driveway through my window, when a silver sedan pulled up to the top curb. A woman in her 40s stepped out, carrying a manila envelope and walking with the purposeful stride of someone who did this for a living. Michael was downstairs in the kitchen, making breakfast for Jessica, who had developed a routine of sleeping until almost 10 o'clock each morning. I could hear them talking softly, probably planning their day around Jessica's prenatal appointment scheduled for that afternoon. They had no idea that their comfortable little world was about to implode. The doorbell rang, and I heard Michael's footsteps crossing the tile floor of the foyer. I crept to the top of the stairs, positioning myself where I could hear but not be seen. "Michael Rodriguez?" the woman asked. "Yes, that's me." "You've been served. Have a good day." There was a moment of silence, followed by the sound of paper rustling as Michael opened the envelope. Then I heard something I'd never heard from my husband before. A sound that was half gasp, half whimper, like someone who'd just been punched in the stomach. "Michael?" Jessica's voice came from the kitchen, tinged with concern. "What is it? Who was at the door?" I heard his footsteps moving slowly back toward the kitchen, and then his voice, shaky and disbelieving. "Emma filed for divorce." "Well, that's good, right?" Jessica said. "I mean, that's what you wanted. That's what we've been waiting for." "No, you don't understand." Michael's voice was getting louder, more agitated. "She's asking for exclusive use of the house. She wants me out immediately, and she's claiming that I've been using marital assets to support what?" Jessica's voice was sharp now, alert to the shift in Michael's tone. "She knows about us, Jess. She knows everything. About the baby, about you living here, about the money I've been spending. She has photographs, financial records, everything." I heard a chair scrape against the kitchen floor, followed by Jessica's voice, higher now and strained with panic. "What do you mean she knows everything? Michael, you told me she knew about us. You said she was okay with everything because you two were separated." "We weren't separated." The words came out as barely a whisper. What do you mean you weren't separated? We were still married. We are still married. I never told her about you. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic on Maple Ridge Drive. Then Jessica spoke, and her voice carried a kind of cold fury that made me almost feel sorry for Michael. Are you telling me that I've been living in your wife's house? That the woman who's been making me dinner and asking about my doctor's appointments doesn't know that I'm carrying your baby? Jessica, I can explain. Explain what? That you're a liar? That you made me into the other woman without telling me? That I've been sitting in her living room, sleeping in her guest room, using her pool, while she knew exactly what was happening? I heard footsteps moving rapidly across the kitchen floor, then Jessica's voice from farther away. I'm packing my things. I'm leaving. Right now. Jess, wait. Let me read this whole thing first. Maybe we can figure out what? How to spin another lie. How to manipulate another situation. Jessica's voice was coming from the stairway now, and I quickly retreated to my office, closing the door softly behind me. But I could still hear everything through the thin walls of the house. Jessica was in the guest room, moving around with the frantic energy of someone who'd just realized they'd been living in a house of cards. I heard drawers slamming, hangers scraping across the closet rod, and the distinctive sound of someone stuffing belongings into suitcases without regard for organization. Michael was following her around, his voice pleading and desperate. Jessica, please just listen to me. We can work this out. We can find another place. We? There is no we anymore, Michael. There never was a we. There was just you lying to two different women and hoping neither of us would figure it out. I heard footsteps on the stairs, heavy and labored, and I knew Jessica was carrying her suitcases down by herself. Michael's voice followed her. Let me help you with those. You shouldn't be carrying heavy things. Don't touch me. Jessica's voice was ice cold. Don't help me. Don't follow me. Don't call me. I never want to see you again. I moved to my window and watched Jessica load her belongings into a blue Honda Civic that must have been her original car, the one she'd driven before Michael bought her the new CR-V. She moved with the efficiency of someone who'd had practice, leaving quickly, and I found myself wondering what other situations she'd escaped from in her young life. Michael stood in the driveway, still holding the divorce papers, watching helplessly as Jessica slammed her trunk shut and got into the driver's seat. She rolled down her window and said something to him that I couldn't hear from my vantage point. But whatever it was made Michael step backward like he'd been slapped. Then she was gone, driving down Maple Ridge Drive toward a future that no longer included my husband, leaving Michael standing alone in the driveway of the house that had never belonged to him. I waited 10 minutes before going downstairs, giving Michael time to process what had just happened, and me time to prepare for the conversation we were about to have. When I walked into the kitchen, I found him sitting at the table, the divorce papers spread out in front of him, his head in his hands. Rough morning? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. He looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd known him, Michael looked genuinely defeated. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his eyes were red-rimmed, and his face carried the expression of someone who'd just watched his life fall apart in real time. You knew, he said. This whole time you knew about Jessica. I poured myself a cup of coffee from the pot he'd made earlier, taking my time to add cream and sugar while I considered my response. I knew a lot of things, Michael. How long? Long enough to hire a private investigator. Long enough to document your affair in excruciating detail. Long enough to transfer most of our joint assets into accounts you can't access. Michael's face went pale. You moved our money? I moved my money. The money I earned at the job I go to every day while you were playing house with your pregnant girlfriend. I sat down across from him at the table where we'd shared so many meals, where Jessica had told me about her prenatal appointments and her plans for the baby, where the three of us had pretended to be some kind of unconventional but functional family unit. Emma, I know how this looks. How this looks, I interrupted. Michael, you moved your pregnant mistress into my house. You used my utilities to power the changing table you set up for her. You ate food I bought while planning to leave me for another woman. How exactly do you think this looks? He was quiet, for a long moment, staring down at the divorce papers with the expression of someone trying to solve an impossible puzzle. I never meant for it to happen this way. Which part? The affair, the pregnancy, or the part where you decided to turn my home into your love nest? Any of it. All of it. Michael's voice was barely above a whisper. I fell in love with her, Emma. It wasn't supposed to happen, but it did. I studied his face, looking for any trace of the man I'd married 2 years ago, the charming contractor who'd swept me off my feet with his passion for his work and his apparent devotion to building a life together. That man was gone, replaced by someone who looked smaller, weaker, diminished by his own choices. You fell in love, I repeated, and that justified lying to both of us? Jessica had no idea we weren't separated, Michael. She thought she was moving in with her boyfriend, not destroying someone else's marriage. I was going to tell her. I was going to tell both of you. I just needed time to figure out how. Time. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You had 7 months to figure it out, Michael. 7 months while Jessica got more and more pregnant, while she made plans for your future together, while I paid the mortgage on the house where you were playing father-to-be. Michael looked up at me then, and I saw something that might have been regret in his eyes. I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you. But Emma, we can still work this out. We don't have to get divorced. We can go to counseling. We can figure out how to move forward. The audacity was breathtaking. Even now, sitting in my kitchen with divorce papers scattered around him and his pregnant girlfriend having just walked out of his life, Michael thought he could negotiate his way back into my good graces. Move forward? I said. Michael, you spent 6 months of our marriage sleeping with another woman. You got her pregnant. You moved her into my house. You used my money to buy her a car and baby furniture. What exactly do you think we'd be moving forward to? I made mistakes, but I love you, Emma. I've always loved you. No, I said, standing up from the table. You loved the idea of me. You loved having a successful wife who owned a beautiful house and earned enough money to support your lifestyle. But you didn't love me enough to stay faithful, and you didn't respect me enough to be honest. I walked to the kitchen counter and picked up a manila envelope I'd placed there that morning, setting it down in front of Michael next to the divorce papers. What's this? He asked. Evidence. Photographs of you and Jessica together over the past 2 months. Financial records showing every penny you spent on her and her pregnancy. Documentation of her residency in this house. Proof that you systematically lied to both of us while using my resources to build a relationship with another woman. Michael opened the envelope and started flipping through the contents, his face growing more ashen with each page. There were photographs of him and Jessica at restaurants, holding hands as they walked into her prenatal appointments, kissing in her apartment doorway. There were copies of credit card statements highlighting charges for baby supplies, maternity clothes, and the Honda CR-V he'd purchased for her. You hired someone to follow me? I hired someone to document your affair so that when this moment came, there would be no doubt about what kind of man you really are. Michael set the photos down with shaking hands. Emma, please. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for another chance. I looked at him for a long moment. This man who'd shared my bed for 2 years, who'd promised to love and honor me in front of our families and friends, who'd made me believe we were building something permanent and meaningful together. Michael, forgiveness isn't the same thing as stupidity, I said. I might forgive you someday, for my own peace of mind, But I will never trust you again, and I will never give you another opportunity to humiliate me. So that's it? 5 years. Together, and you're just throwing it all away? I'm not throwing anything away. You threw it away when you decided that our marriage vows were suggestions rather than commitments. You threw it away when you chose to betray me rather than talk to me about whatever problems you thought we had. I picked up the divorce papers and flipped to the last page, pointing to the bottom where my signature was already notarized and official. I signed these yesterday, Michael. This isn't a negotiation or a trial separation. This is me ending our marriage because you already ended it months ago. Michael stared at my signature like it was written in a foreign language. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore. You have 48 hours to pack your belongings and find somewhere else to live. After that, if you're still here, I'll have you removed by the sheriff's department. Emma, you can't just kick me out. I live here. I smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd felt in months. No, Michael, you don't live here. You never lived here. You were a guest in my house, and your invitation has been permanently revoked. But the mortgage, the household expenses, I've been contributing to everything. You've been contributing to utilities and groceries. This house was purchased with my inheritance money before we were married. The deed has my name on it, and only my name. You have no legal claim to this property. The reality of his situation was finally sinking in. Michael wasn't just losing his wife. He was losing his home, his comfortable lifestyle, and the financial security that came with being married to a woman who earned a steady income and owned valuable real estate. What about my business? My tools are in the garage. Your tools can go with you. Your business was never my responsibility. Michael sat in silence for several minutes, apparently trying to process the complete collapse of the life he'd taken for granted. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a bitterness I'd never heard from him before. You're really going to destroy me over this? Destroy you? I almost laughed. Michael, I'm doing exactly what you did to me. The only difference is that I'm being honest about it. That's not the same thing, isn't it? You destroyed our marriage, you destroyed Jessica's trust, and you destroyed any chance of an amicable divorce when you decided to move your pregnant girlfriend into my house. I'm just cleaning up the mess you made. I walked toward the kitchen doorway, then turned back to look at him one more time. Jessica was right to leave you, by the way. She's young and beautiful and about to have a baby. She deserves better than a man who lies to everyone he claims to love. Don't talk about Jessica. Why not? She was living in my house for a week. I made her dinner. I asked about her pregnancy. I even liked her. She seems like a decent person who got caught up in your web of lies. Michael's face flushed with anger. You don't know anything about her. I know she had no idea you were still married when she moved in here. I know she believed your story about us being separated. And I know she left the moment she realized you'd been lying to her about everything. She'll come back. When she calms down, she'll realize that we can work through this. I shook my head. Michael, Jessica isn't coming back. She's 7 months pregnant and just discovered that the father of her baby is a pathological liar who used her to hurt his wife. She's probably already calling her friends and family to warn them about you. The truth of that statement hit Michael like a physical blow. He'd lost both women in his life within the span of an hour, and he was only now beginning to understand the full consequences of his choices. I need to call her. I need to explain. You need to pack your things and find somewhere else to live. What you don't need to do is harass a pregnant woman who's made it clear she doesn't want to see you again. I left him sitting at the kitchen table and went back upstairs to my office, where I called Patricia Williams to report that the papers had been served and that Michael was alone in the house, processing the reality of his situation. How did he take it? Patricia asked. About as well as expected. He tried to negotiate, offered to go to counseling, claimed he still loved me. The usual script from a man who's been caught red-handed. And the girlfriend? Gone. She left the moment. She realized Michael had been lying to her about our marriage status. I don't think she'll be back. Good. That eliminates any complications about her residency status in your house. Is Michael planning to contest the divorce? I looked out my office window at the pool area where Michael and Jessica had lounged, together just a week ago, making plans for their future. Now the space was empty except for the ghost of their misplaced confidence. I don't think he has the energy to fight, I said. He's lost his wife, his girlfriend, and his home all in the same morning. I think he's beginning to understand that actions have consequences. We'll be ready if he changes his mind, but honestly, Emma, given the evidence we have, any lawyer would advise him to accept your terms and walk away quietly. After hanging up with Patricia, I spent the rest of the morning in my office, listening to Michael move around downstairs. I heard him making phone calls, his voice alternating between pleading and angry as he apparently tried to reach Jessica. I heard him in the garage, presumably assessing his tools and equipment. I heard him climbing the stairs to our bedroom, probably beginning the process of packing his belongings. Around noon, there was a knock on my office door. "Come in," I said. Michael appeared in the doorway, looking haggard and exhausted. "Emma, I'm going to stay at Robert's place for a few days while I figure things out. But I want you to know that this isn't over." "Yes, it is." "No, it's not. I'm going to fight this divorce. I'm going to challenge your claims about the house. I'm going to make sure you don't get to play the victim while you destroy my life." I looked at him calmly. This man who still believed he could intimidate or manipulate his way out of the consequences he'd created for himself. "Michael, you're welcome to challenge anything you want. But before you hire a lawyer and spend money you don't have on a case you can't win, you should know something." "What?" I opened my desk drawer and pulled out another manila envelope. This one thicker than the first. "This contains documentation of every lie you told, every dollar you stole from our joint accounts, and every moment you spent with Jessica in this house. It also contains financial records showing that I've been the primary breadwinner in our marriage, that this house was purchased entirely with my money, and that you've contributed virtually nothing to our shared assets." Michael stared at the envelope like it contained explosives. "If you want to fight this divorce, you'll lose everything," I continued. "You'll lose whatever savings you have left. You'll lose any chance of a civil relationship with me. And you'll lose what little dignity you have remaining. But most importantly, all of this evidence will become public record, which means Jessica will see exactly how thoroughly you betrayed both of us. You're bluffing. Try me." We stared at each other across my office, and I saw the moment when Michael realized that the woman he'd underestimated for months was not going to be bullied or manipulated into giving him what he wanted. "I'll be gone by Thursday," he said finally. "Good. Leave your keys on the kitchen counter when you go." He turned to leave, then stopped in the doorway. "For what it's worth, Emma, I really did love you." "No, Michael," I said. "You loved what I could give you. There's a difference." After he left, I sat in my office and watched the sun move across the sky, casting different shadows in the backyard where I'd spent so many happy hours during the early days of our marriage. The pool was still and quiet, reflecting the Arizona blue sky like a mirror that showed only truth. Michael was gone, Jessica was gone, and I was alone in the house that had always been mine. But for the first time in months, the silence felt peaceful rather than oppressive. It felt like the beginning of something new rather than the end of something I'd never really had. I was Emma Rodriguez again, not just Michael's wife or the woman who'd been betrayed and humiliated. I was the woman who'd bought this house with her grandmother's money, who'd built a successful career through her own hard work, who'd handled betrayal with dignity and strength. And I was just getting started. 6 months after Michael left, I stood in my kitchen making coffee on a crisp February morning, watching the sunrise paint the desert mountains in shades of rose and gold. The house felt different now, Not empty, but spacious, like a room that had been overcrowded and was finally breathing freely again. The silence that had once felt oppressive during those final months of my marriage now felt like peace, the kind of deep quiet that comes when you're no longer walking on eggshells in your own home. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks earlier, a surprisingly swift process given Patricia Williams' thorough preparation and Michael's decision not to contest the terms. He'd signed the papers quietly, accepting the settlement that left him with his business equipment, his truck, and half of our joint savings account. Everything else stayed with me, including the house that had never really been ours despite his assumptions. I'd thrown myself into work with a renewed energy that surprised even me. The promotion to marketing director had come through in December, along with a salary increase that made the mortgage payments feel negligible rather than significant. My new office was on the 20th floor, with panoramic views of Phoenix. That reminded me daily of how far I'd climbed from the confused, hurt woman who'd discovered her husband's betrayal through text messages on a kitchen counter. The team I managed now included 12 account specialists, and I'd implemented systems and strategies that had increased client retention by 45% in just 4 months. Work had become more than a paycheck or a distraction. It had become proof of my capabilities, evidence that I could build something meaningful entirely on my own merit. Lisa had been promoted too, to senior account manager, and we'd developed a professional partnership that made our personal friendship even stronger. She'd been my anchor during the worst days of the divorce proceedings, the friend who brought wine and takeout when I was too exhausted to cook, who listened to my anger and hurt without trying to fix anything or offer platitudes about everything happening for a reason. "You're different now," she'd told me over dinner the previous weekend. "Stronger, but also lighter somehow. Like you were carrying weight you didn't even realize was there." She was right. I felt lighter, not just because Michael was gone, but because I'd proven to myself that I could handle betrayal, deception, and the complete upheaval of my life without losing who I was at my core. I'd navigated the crisis with strategy rather than emotion, with dignity rather than vengeance, and I'd emerged with my self-respect intact. The house itself had been transformed too. I'd redecorated the guest room where Jessica had briefly lived, replacing the blue and white bedding with warm earth tones and converting the space into a proper home office with built-in shelving and a comfortable reading chair. The master bedroom had been completely redesigned, with new furniture, new colors, and new memories that had nothing to do with the marriage that had ended there. Most significantly, I'd started dating again, something I'd thought would feel impossible during those dark months when I'd questioned everything about my judgment and my worth. David Martinez, the private investigator who'd helped document Michael's affair, had become an unexpected friend during the divorce proceedings, and that friendship had gradually evolved into something deeper and more meaningful. David was nothing like Michael. Where Michael had been charming and confident on the surface but fundamentally deceptive underneath, David was quietly honest in a way that made me feel safe to be vulnerable again. He was divorced himself, with 2 teenage daughters who lived with their mother but spent weekends at his modest house in central Phoenix. He understood betrayal from the inside, understood the slow process of rebuilding trust in your own instincts and in other people. Our relationship had developed slowly, carefully, with the kind of patience that comes from both partners having learned hard lessons about the difference between passion and compatibility. We'd been seeing each other exclusively for 3 months, and while neither of us was rushing toward big commitments or dramatic declarations, there was a steady comfort between us that felt like the foundation for something lasting. "I like how quiet your house is," he'd told me the first time he'd stayed overnight. "It feels peaceful, like the kind of place where you can actually rest." That observation had meant more to me than any compliment about my appearance or my accomplishments. The peace in my house had been hard-won, created through months of emotional work and practical decisions that prioritized my well-being over anyone else's comfort or expectations. The guest room had hosted several visitors since Jessica's dramatic departure. My sister Sarah had stayed for a week during her divorce proceedings, finding comfort in my newly remodeled space and my first-hand knowledge of how to navigate the legal and emotional challenges of ending a marriage. My college roommate had spent a long weekend with me, marveling at the house and the life I'd built while sharing stories about her own career successes and relationship adventures. Most memorably, I'd hosted my grandmother's sister, Tia Carmen, for 2 weeks during the holidays. She was 87 years old, sharp as a knife, and full of stories about the family matriarchs who'd shaped my understanding of strength and independence. She'd sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee and offering perspective that only comes from nearly 9 decades of experience. "Your grandmother would be proud," she'd told me one morning, watching me prepare for work with the efficient routine I'd perfected over months of living alone. "She bought this house for you through that inheritance, you know. She always said you were the one in the family with the backbone to build something that couldn't be taken away." "She couldn't have known I'd need to defend it from my own husband," I'd replied. Tia Carmen had laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Mija, she lived through the Depression, 2 wars, and 5 decades of marriage to a man who drank too much and gambled away their savings twice. She knew exactly what kind of challenges you might face. That's why she left you the money. Not just to buy a house, but to have something that was yours alone when you needed it most." That conversation had reframed my understanding of the inheritance that had made my independence possible. It wasn't just money. It was generational wisdom, a legacy of women who'd learned to protect themselves and each other in a world that didn't always value their contributions or respect their autonomy. I'd also reconnected with extended family members I'd lost touch with during my marriage, people who'd been subtly pushed aside as Michael had encouraged me to focus on his social circle and his vision of our future together. Cousins who worked in education and healthcare, aunts who ran small businesses, uncles who'd built successful careers through steady work and careful planning. People who valued substance over style, who measured success by integrity rather than image. The contrast between my current social circle and the one I'd inhabited as Michael's wife was striking. Where his friends had been focused on appearances, status symbols, and maintaining facades of success, my renewed relationships were built on authenticity, mutual support, and genuine affection. I'd traded superficial connections for deeper friendships, and the difference felt like breathing clean air after months in a smoke-filled room. My relationship with money had changed too. During my marriage, I'd thought of our finances as shared resources, even though I'd been the primary earner. I'd felt guilty about my higher salary, as if my success somehow diminished Michael's contributions to our partnership. Now I understood that financial independence wasn't just about having money. It was about having the freedom to make choices based on my values rather than someone else's expectations or needs. I'd increased my retirement contributions, started an emergency fund that could cover a full year of expenses, and begun investing in a diversified portfolio that would provide long-term security regardless of any future relationship status. Patricia Williams had connected me with a financial advisor who specialized in working with newly divorced women, helping me understand how to protect and grow assets that had always been mine, but that I'd never fully claimed. "You're not just recovering from your divorce," the advisor Michelle had told me during our first meeting. "You're building wealth in a way that ensures you'll never be financially vulnerable again, regardless of what happens in your personal life." That perspective had been liberating. I wasn't just surviving the end of my marriage, I was thriving, in ways that had been impossible when I'd been trying to maintain a partnership with someone who didn't share my values or respect my contributions. The legal aftermath of the divorce had provided its own form of closure. Michael had attempted, through his own attorney, to negotiate a larger settlement 6 weeks after signing the initial papers, claiming that he'd been under emotional duress and hadn't fully understood the implications of the agreement. Patricia had shut down that attempt swiftly and definitively, presenting the mountain of evidence we'd compiled along with documentation of Michael's clear understanding of the terms at the time of signing. "Your ex-husband is learning that there are consequences for trying to renegotiate deals after you've already been caught cheating," Patricia had told me with satisfaction. The judge was not sympathetic to his claims of emotional distress, given the circumstances that created that distress. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that Michael was struggling professionally as well as personally. Word of his affair had spread through Phoenix's tight-knit construction community, and several clients had ended their contracts with him after learning about his personal conduct. The reputation he'd valued so highly, the professional image he'd worked years to build, had been damaged by his own choices in a way that would take years to repair, if it ever could be. Jessica, on the other hand, had apparently landed on her feet with impressive resilience. Through the same network of acquaintances, I'd learned that she'd moved back to California to be closer to her family during the final months of her pregnancy. She'd given birth to a healthy baby boy in November and was working remotely for a tech company while living with her parents and completing her degree in computer science. I felt genuine relief knowing that Jessica was building a stable life for herself and her son. She'd been an innocent victim of Michael's deception, a young woman who'd trusted the wrong man but had been smart enough to leave when she discovered the truth. Her quick departure from my house that terrible Tuesday morning had been the action of someone with good instincts and strong self-preservation skills. The baby, a child I'd never meet, but who would always be connected to the most challenging period of my life, was growing up with a mother who'd chosen truth over comfortable lies. That seemed like the best possible outcome from such a complicated beginning. Spring arrived early in Phoenix that year, with temperatures in the 70s by March and the desert plants blooming in spectacular displays of color. I'd always loved this season, the brief window when the Sonoran Desert showed off its surprising capacity for beauty before the brutal heat of summer set in. This year, the blooming seemed especially vibrant, as if the landscape itself was celebrating renewal and fresh starts. David and I had begun talking about the future, not in the desperate way that marked relationships built on fear of being alone, but with the careful optimism of two people who'd learned the difference between love and need. We were planning a trip to Sedona for my birthday, a long weekend of hiking and quiet conversation in the red rock country that neither of us had explored despite living in Arizona for years. "I like how we fit together," he'd told me recently. As we sat by my pool on a warm evening, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the stars emerge in the desert sky. "We're both whole people who choose to be together, not broken people trying to fix each other." That observation captured something essential about the difference between my relationship with David and my marriage to Michael. With Michael, I'd constantly felt like I was auditioning for the role of wife, trying to meet standards that seemed to shift based on his mood or circumstances. With David, I felt appreciated for exactly who I was, without needing to transform myself to earn his affection or respect. The house that had been the battleground for my self-respect had become a sanctuary again, but a different kind than it had been during my marriage. Then, it had been a refuge from the world, a place where Michael and I could retreat from external pressures and focus on building our life together. Now, it was a base of operations, a place where I could rest and recharge between the various activities and relationships that made up my full, complicated, satisfying life. I'd hosted dinner parties for my work colleagues, book club meetings for a group of women I'd joined through the local library, and casual gatherings for the extended family members I'd reconnected with. The house had become a place where people gathered because they wanted to be there, not because they were fulfilling social obligations or maintaining appearances. On this particular February morning, as I prepared for another day at the office where I was respected and valued, I found myself thinking about the woman I'd been a year earlier. The woman who'd stood in this same kitchen, reading text messages that revealed her husband's betrayal, feeling like her world was collapsing around her. That woman had been strong, but she hadn't known it yet. She'd been capable of handling crisis, but she'd never been tested. She'd been financially independent, but she'd never had to rely entirely on her own resources. She'd been worthy of love and respect, but she'd never had to prove it to herself. The journey from that moment to this one hadn't been easy or straightforward. There had been nights when the silence in the house felt oppressive rather than peaceful. Mornings when the task of rebuilding seemed overwhelming. Days when the temptation to settle for less than I deserved felt almost irresistible. But I'd learned something valuable through the process of losing a marriage and keeping my dignity. Strength isn't something you have or don't have. It's something you build through making difficult choices, standing up for yourself when it matters, and refusing to accept treatment that diminishes your worth. I'd also learned that independence isn't the same as isolation. Building a life that couldn't be destroyed by someone else's betrayal didn't mean building a life without meaningful relationships. It meant choosing those relationships carefully, maintaining clear boundaries, and never again confusing love with the willingness to accept disrespect. As I gathered my things for work, checking my calendar for the day's meetings and presentations, I felt a familiar sense of anticipation about the challenges and opportunities ahead. My career had become more than a source of income. It had become proof of my competence, evidence of my ability to create value and solve problems in ways that had nothing to do with my marital status or personal relationships. The phone rang as I was putting on my jacket, and I smiled when I saw David's name on the caller ID. "Good morning," I answered. "Good morning, beautiful. How's your day looking?" "Busy, but good. Client presentation at 10, team meeting at 2, and dinner." "With Lisa tonight? You?" "Surveillance job in Scottsdale, but I should be done by 6. Want to grab coffee tomorrow morning before work?" The easy rhythm of our conversation, the way we coordinated our independent lives while maintaining our connection, felt like the most natural thing in the world. This was what a healthy relationship looked like. Two complete people choosing to share their time and energy because they enhanced each other's lives rather than filling empty spaces in them. "I'd love to," I said. "The usual place?" "Perfect. Have a great day, Emma. Show them how it's done." After hanging up, I stood in my kitchen for one more moment, looking around at the space that had witnessed so much drama, betrayal, and ultimately transformation. The morning light streaming through the windows caught the glass surfaces and stainless steel appliances, creating patterns of reflection and illumination that seemed symbolic of clarity emerging from confusion. This house had been my grandmother's gift to me, my first major adult purchase, the foundation of a marriage that hadn't lasted, and the fortress where I'd discovered my own strength. It was filled with memories both painful and joyful, lessons learned through necessity, and the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing you can depend on yourself when everything else falls apart. I locked the door behind me and walked to my car, ready for another day of challenges I was equipped to handle, relationships I'd chosen carefully, and successes I'd earned through my own efforts. The woman who drove down Maple Ridge Drive that morning was fundamentally the same person who'd bought this house with inheritance money 5 years earlier. But she was also transformed by experience, strengthened by adversity, and free from the illusions that had once made her vulnerable to manipulation. The desert stretched out around me as I drove toward downtown Phoenix, vast and beautiful and unforgiving to those who didn't respect its power. I'd learned to navigate its challenges, just as I'd learned to navigate the challenges of betrayal, divorce, and rebuilding. The landscape that had seemed harsh and unforgiving during the worst days of my marriage now looked like home, a place where strong things thrived and weak things didn't survive, where beauty emerged from difficulty, and where the sunrise always promised another chance to get it right. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.